Hi. So I'll let participants in now, and we'll give it about 5 minutes, and then Marie can take over. Yeah. Great. Yeah.
Welcome everyone. We're here from Mannheim in Germany, and we're just gonna wait a couple of minutes until we start to let people into the Zoom. So yeah, keep with us. Where's everyone joining from today? Maybe we can briefly just.
No idea. It's just hard to say where people are joining from, really, but hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're all joining from. Aha, we have somebody from Chennai. Hello, Mushtaq. You can say your hellos in the chat, we'll get to know. Great. You know, in hindsight, I'm thinking we could have prepared a moonwalk dance or something while people are joining. We can them a bit. In hindsight, maybe another symposium. Exactly, like sitting in our chairs wherever. Hello, Pierre Philippe. Thanks today. Hello, Real, how do I say your name? From Glasgow. Great, I think maybe we can start, Marie?
Yeah,
what do you think?
sure. Yeah, let's start.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, hello from Germany. Hello from Mannheim. I'm Marie, and with me I have my colleague Jasmin. We're from the Biennale für aktuelle Fotografie. And the Biennale is a curated exhibition that's spread out over 6 museums in Mannheim, Heidelberg, and Ludwigshafen, which has happened since 2005. And each edition looks at different themes. The next one will be curated by Iris Sicking from the Netherlands, and it will take place in March to May 22. So yeah, if you are allowed to travel again, who knows what will happen by then. We would be really happy to welcome you then. And apart from that, we also want to discuss and look at photography as sort of one of the main media of our time to reflect our world. And that's why we're here today, and we're really happy to be looking at walking and photography with all these wonderful speakers and our partners in Chennai. And in Germany, we've sort of been out in and out of lockdown for about a year now. So kind of was like a constant lockdown. So in a way, walking was the only thing that we could do. And also it has been quite cold in the past month. So it was like keeping us warm a bit. And yeah, what we really noticed here in Germany, there was like a real renaissance of walking. So there was lots of like radio shows, TV programs, podcasts, articles about walking. Even Vogue wrote about it. And there were like Spotify playlists that you could download about, you know, if you're going on a walk on your own, if you're running in the park. So yeah, it really is like a thing. And we noticed that when we as a team spoke about it, that we are walking a lot more, like to the supermarket, or yeah, meeting friends in a park, because there's nothing else that you can do in this time. And we also noticed that we weren't alone. There's this park called Rheinterrassen in Mannheim. When you go there on a Sunday, it's like so busy that sometimes the police had to show up there to actually check whether people could still keep their distance outside. And yeah, and even before the pandemic, it seemed like walking experienced a real boom. So lots of people have like health apps on their phone where they can like keep track of their movements each day, or have like a smartwatch and things like that. And yeah, for us, going out felt like a little escape in this time that can allow us to experience our environment more consciously. And even in times of the pandemic, it actually, you know, had very positive connotations. But then there were other where walking became very necessary and existential. So that's why we're here today and what we're wanting to discuss, because also when we spoke with our partners in Chennai, we really realized that it seems like we have sort of, yeah, quite different ideas and perspectives of walking. So we're looking forward to learning more about these today, and yeah, handing over to Chennai now.
Thank you, Marie. Hello, everyone. Vanakkam, as we say in Chennai. We're not just a photography organization. We also have a large photography festival that we do in Chennai. Maybe many of you don't know about it. So I'll quickly brief you through some of the work that we do. Our primary focus area is in photography education and critical discourse that takes place throughout the year in the form of talks, workshops, reviews, reading rooms, and building many similar community engagements. All this activity culminates into a beautiful photography festival that is held every 2 years, which was unfortunately pushed from last year, our third edition, which is meant to happen this year now, this December. And a lot of international artists, national photographers, and local photographers from around Chennai as well as from the state are showcased in beautiful heritage spaces on the beach, in train stations, parks, and many more similar places to explore the city of Chennai. We would encourage you to follow us and stay tuned on our social media. We are very active at Chennai Photo Biennale, and our next edition is of which reflects the exigencies of our times and is slated, as I mentioned, for December 2021. It is curated by a team of curatorial members, two who are from Germany actually, Boaz Levin and Kirsten Meinecke, and two from India, Arko Datto and Bhuma Padmanabhan. All these details would be available through the links that we are sharing in the chat. So please stay tuned with us. Coming to the context of today's program, post-pandemic, while now we hardly are able to walk around carefree the way we used to, we've gathered to share these moments, practices, and experiences around the theme of walking in a virtual space right from our chairs. And in India and many other parts of South Asia, walking is more of a reflection of class divides, of religious and ideological differences, and has drastically different purposes and connotations. I mean, one of the recent events that we have witnessed in India is the huge migrant worker population that had to walk for hundreds of miles just to get home when the lockdown was suddenly announced. Given that a majority of India's population falls under the rural population category, walking is just a mere necessity. Children have to walk for miles to reach school. Women have to walk miles to fetch water, even today. So while this is the reality of many people in the South Asian region, for the urban elite, on the contrary, walking is more of a lifestyle activity. It is not uncommon to see people investing in walking wardrobes and walking down to, and going in their cars to the local park or the beach to catch up with their friends or networks, of course, accompanied with a breakfast plan. So clearly, there's a huge divide as to who walks how and what are the purposes of walking. And through the symposium, we really hope to bring forth the many ideologies, many practices across cultures, across experiences. And I will now hand over to Marie to introduce our first speaker for today. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoy today's session. Yesterday's session is also available on our Facebook and YouTube, so please feel free to share that in your networks. And over to you, Marie.
Yes, just before we introduce the first speaker, I wanted to mention that you can put any of your questions into the Q&A box, or you can, communicate with us through the chat, and we will then pose them to, we will prompt them to the speaker, or at the end for the panel with Alexander. So yes, welcome Mikhail Ivanovsky. He's a Cardiff-based artist and photographer, and graduated from documentary photography at the University of Wales in 2008. And he's won awards such as the Magenta Foundation Emerging Photographers Award, was nominated for the Deutsche Börse Photography Prize, and his work has been exhibited and published worldwide. And it has recently been acquired by the National Museum of Wales. And there are two projects that I want to mention. One is the recent project, Go Home Polish, that has been featured in very many newspapers and TV features, and also his monograph, Clear of People, that was published in 2017. And yes, over to you, Michal. We're looking forward to hearing more about your work today.
Thank you so much, Marie, and thank you, Chennai and Biennale, for having me as a participant. It's a great honor. So today, I'm just going to fire up my presentation, and I believe that's working now. Is it?
Not yet.
We can't see it at the moment.
Oh, sorry. There we go. So, I will talk about two projects today. I'll leave some time for a question as well. So, if you have any, please feel free in the chat box. Projects I'll talk about People and Go Home Polish, as Marie has mentioned. And both of the projects are walk-in projects. I have prepared a little map to show roughly what has happened. The place in between, called Wrocław, is where I was actually from, where I was born. That's in Poland. Then on the left-hand side, we have Cardiff, where I live, from where I'm speaking to you right now. And on the other side is Kaluga.
Yeah, could you put it on full screen? Sorry.
Absolutely, yes. Sorry.
Thanks.
I thought I had is this full screen now, or is it not yet?
I think you'll have to stop sharing and reshare your full screen again. I think you've just shared the PPT.
All right, okay. You would think that photographers have got this all figured out, but clearly I don't. Sorry, guys.
No problem.
Mhm. Has that worked?
No, I mean, I can still see only the presentation itself, but not the full screen.
Okay, I wonder if I do.
Yeah, now it works.
Okay. Right. So these are the two tracks. These are the two walks I did. One of them is from Russia to Poland. One of them is from Wales to Poland. And I'll talk about them. Start with the one from Russia to Poland because that's the first walk that I had done. And that project is called Clear of People. And it tells a story of a couple of teenagers from 1940, teenagers, my grandfather and his brother. And there's also the kind of love interest of my grandfather at the bottom, who became my grandmother. And the story was that in 1945, my grandfather escaped from a gulag in Russia. He was a prisoner of war, and him and his brother walked for 3 months in search of the family back in Poland. And I was interested in the story not as much as a story of heroes, but a story of regular teenagers, just like anybody who wakes up to a war. Nobody really is prepared for it. And I was really interested. That was the time of 2012, 13, 14, when the migration crisis across Europe was actually rife, and there were people on boats from burning Aleppo, traveling to safety in Europe. And their experience, we could watch on the news, we could see those harrowing images. And then I wanted to compare it to the experience of my grandfather from 70 years before, because fundamentally it's exactly the same story. You're escaping from danger into safety. And I was curious about, how do people do it? How do you just one day decide, I'm gonna have to run, and you just get up and do it? And my grandfather never really talked about it in terms of heroic stories. It was just something you did, you know. It's a human condition. And I was very curious about the logistics of it and the harrowing elements of it. And then I just thought the only way to actually find out is to go and do it. And that's why I decided to go to Russia and retrace the whole journey they had done. I had a map from my great uncle in which he described where they had gone and what had happened to them. So I had a very specific itinerary. I knew where I was going, and I knew how to follow exactly the same landscapes. So in 2013, I went to Russia and I retraced the journey, and I made images along the way. And the images were, as the title suggests, clear of people, only because the experience of the fugitives was requiring that they only walked at night and they slept during the day. They only walked through forests. They tried not to encounter any people because at that time, the secret police would pay 16 kilograms of flour for every fugitive you caught. So there was a manhunt, basically. It was the end of the war. People were starving. So we would just trade a fugitive for food for your own children. So it was a very precarious journey for them. For me, of course, it was a different story, but I wasn't trying to recreate the same experience, of course, because I was a free man walking with a credit card and a passport. I could go anywhere. I speak a bit of Russian as well. I didn't have to hide. So my experience was different, but what was the same was the landscape. And that was what I was focusing on. Landscape as your confidant and your friend, but also as your foe, as you walk. And landscape doesn't discriminate. It is what it is. It hasn't got an agenda of trying to help you or trying to jeopardize you. It just is. And you have to navigate it democratically. Each of us, as we cross it, we have to face exactly the same challenges and perceive the same beauty, I imagine. So there was a certain meditation in this journey, as when you walk alone for so long, you lose track of time, and the signifiers of time disappear, especially in rural areas. You know, trees look very similar now to what they did 70 years ago. So at some point, when I didn't see people for like 2 days, and I just walked among the trees, I could easily have been in 1945 or 2050. So the meditation on that landscape is quite transcendental. And I was trying to photograph it from a perspective of a fugitive, or of a person who is avoiding contact with people. So there was a certain element of spying and hiding and avoiding. But what I was also interested in was the paradox in the landscape. And I found quite a lot of that conversation on roads that lead nowhere. And I think this image I particularly found it quite interesting, that you find these environments of entrapment that kind of happens to these bizarre creatures along the way. And I found it quite poetic in many ways as I was walking. And yes, quite some of the images quite brutal, I would say, but that wasn't my intention. My intention was to show the meditation of landscape and the democracy of it, how it embraces alone exactly the same way. So I did that for roughly 3 months as well, and managed to somehow cross different seasons, which was roughly the same time space that my grandfather and his brother crossed. They started in August and finished in November, so I did exactly the same. So when I was in Lithuania and Belarus, I started experiencing some of the cold. And again, people appear in these images, but only as observed from a distance. There's never any actual interaction with humans. It is quite a lot of symbolism. I was reading, of course, I was reading books about the places that they had come from. They were from what is now Lithuania. And this image is particularly important in this series because this is where my grandfather was born. There's a small place called Panierai, just outside of Vilnius. And this particular forest is an extermination camp. So 100,000 people were killed in this forest. But when I arrived there, it was just so serene and quiet. Only the little snow kind of ghosts were appearing from the trees. And for me, the kind of juxtaposition of places that are so democratically, they don't care about what happens there, but I was there in this serene place that 70 years ago meant something totally different. And at the same time, people were drowning on boats in Aleppo. So the whole experience of traversing as a human, not only in your particular space and time, but also through history, how these patterns are repeated and how experiences are repeated. That was something I was interested in. And therefore, that's why I was trying to avoid signifiers of time and telling a particular story of particular fugitives, because it didn't matter who it was about, because it was about you, it was about me, it was about all of us being potentially subjects to such journeys. You know, it's the human, the tragedy of the human condition. And I did actually, I published a book with these images in 2017, and the book in the middle part of the book actually is the story of my grandfather and his escape, but not again from the perspective of this is the tragedy of these particular people, but it was a story of the childhood. There were images from the archives when they were teenagers. There's a picture of my grandfather from 1930s taking a selfie, and he's with his friends on bicycles. And because there was no remote shutter releases, they attached a piece of string to the camera. So you can see the three boys on bicycles, and one of them is pulling a string to release the shutter. And that was a 1930s selfie. And for me, that was quite a sobering, I would say, experience to put them as humans who could be here now. It's not that history has got this tendency to say, oh, that happened in those days, it's very distant, it couldn't happen to us, all that kind of narrative. But then 70 years ago is not that long. And actually, they were just boisterous teenagers, showing off, cycling around and taking selfies, trying to impress girls, or end that story together in a dialogue without actually glorifying any of these events, because there's nothing glorious about being a fugitive. So that's clear of people. That's the first journey. And then, interestingly enough, when they were looking for, what they were looking for was home and safety, and they knew exactly where that was because they had been removed from it. And then in 2018, I started a different project called Go Home Polish, which was me looking for home from totally the other side of the world, but going to exactly the same place, almost like addressing the same spot on the map, but with different questions. Like, what for them was definite home, for me is definitely not a home. And we're only 70 years apart. So, the kind of history levels itself out interestingly in here. And this is a graffiti I saw in Cardiff in 2008, and just around the corner from my house where I am now. And of course, it wasn't meant for me personally, but being a Polish person, I focused on that. And it took me 10 years to mull over this, to figure out what it is that I want to do with this graffiti. But the question of what is home appeared straight there and then when I saw it, because I felt I was at home in Wales. I'd already lived here for about 8 years. But then somebody writes this on a wall, and you have to ask yourself a question, like, am I home, or does somebody determine if I'm home, or do I determine if I'm home? Is this my decision? So I decided to find out what home is by walking from my current home in Cardiff to the place of my birth, which is where is it? If I told you to go home, where would you be heading? Would it be somewhere that people speak your language? Would it be where your mama lives? Would it be where people pray to the same God or play for the same football team? Whatever it might be that we use as a determining factor of what home is. So with the help of the Arts Council, I set out on my journey in April 2018, so nearly 3 years ago. And I walked for 3 months alone with a backpack, stopping every 20, 30 kilometers for the night. And I'll share you some images from the road. I was again interested in the landscape and the democracy of it, and how walking is, I would say, the most common denominator. Because we move roughly at the same pace, we experience the world at roughly the same pace when we all walk. If you get people in cars, it's a totally different universe. But by nature, we have these two magnificent limbs that give us the kind of experience of the landscape in the same way, most of us anyway. And what I was interested in was how the individual, which is in this case myself, represents a certain group of people. When you say Go Home Polish, automatically we include 40 million of people who were born in Poland, plus a diaspora living all over the place. And I find that extremely uncomfortable to be called Polish, just like I find comfortable to be called British or any other kind of big group which I didn't choose myself, to belong to. I was born in Poland, but I didn't request prenatally to my mother, I want to be Polish. You just get to be born there. And then you get to be called upon it for certain things, which I found it was just, it's just not fair. What I'm interested in is the individual, because what I am and what I can take responsibility for is Mikhail Ibanovsky. With his mess ups and his successes or whatever he's done, I can actually face up to it, right? So my idea was to take this individual on this journey and present him to the audiences, saying there's no Polish, but there's this Mikhail Iwanovski, and he's got this body, he's got this face, he's got this kind of story, whatever that story is. this is what you can talk about individually. You cannot talk about groups of people because in my world, it just doesn't add up, you know. So that's why I decided to do self-portraits for this project. Not because my ego is so big, but probably is, but I just, I was interested in that kind of narrative. If you have problems with Polish, you have to have a problem with this guy. And that's when we have the conversation. That's why we have a conversation on this level. And I was doing these interventions in the landscape, and I have absolutely no training when it comes to performance. So it was more of a play. I would just set the camera on the tripod, and like in the case of this image, and just do the fall over and over again until I got the right image. But I didn't know what images I was going to be making. I was just working things out as I went, looking for many different aspects of what home is. I mean, it's such a huge question. So I was looking at whatever caught my attention, the stories people were telling me. There would be narratives developing, and I would just focus on them one at a time. And at the end of the journey, I hoped I would have an answer, a collective huge answer to what home is. Or maybe I would have no answer. Sometimes it's good to just ask a question. You don't have to provide the answers, I guess. I was looking at concepts of parasites, you know, like the kind of immigrant parasites that come to this country, take our jobs. And I was looking at nature replicating similar relationships, who's benefiting, who's providing, and how subjective these stories can be, depending on whose perspective you look from. Of course, the parasite becomes the host in certain situations. And again, looking at individualism in nature. It was this wonderful moment when I was looking at the forest, and you know, a forest is such a complicated entity, and then suddenly there's this squiggle in my eye annoying me. I didn't know what it was, and when I changed the focal length and I looked close, this caterpillar came to view, and suddenly the whole forest disappeared. And it was for me this wonderful moment of saying, there is no forest. There's a million of things that we call the forest, but if you look at every single one of those things, then that's what they are, you know. Like, and this caterpillar for me was this astronaut that said, "Hey, stop this forest thing. I am I am a caterpillar. Look at me individually." It was quite childish, poetic for me to rediscover that joy of actually you're a human, and it's enough, you know, for you to be that. You're glorious. I had an accident in London when my camera broke, so I had to stay over for a week in London during that break. And it was when Harry and Meghan were getting married. So I entertained myself through that awful weekend by invading those feats and parades in the streets and photographing myself with cutouts of Meghan and Harry. Then, but before leaving Britain, we stopped in Dover. I mean, I said we because I had my friend and filmmaker joined me a couple of times on the journey to make footage, and he met me in Calais just before I left Britain. And we stopped by the Banksy mural where that one particular star was being chipped off the 12 European flag stars. And I boarded the Spirit of Britain on purpose, just to have that kind of a jab at that. I need to add that I am both Polish and British. I've got dual nationality. So for me, this conversation was between two passports. Or actually, do I care about any of them? And what do they give you? Where do they get you? You know, it's almost like a set of bargaining chips. I was looking at, when I went to Calais, I was looking at, the jungle camp was of course on my mind, but I didn't want to photograph that because it's been done so much. But the only picture I took in Calais was actually in the port, where I saw a bird had weaved her nest among barbed wire. And I found that so beautiful, that a place that is so hostile actually is perfect for a home for this bird because she's safe there. And that's a lovely messy nest the crows made there. And again, some more interventions in the landscape as I was crossing France and Belgium. Another part of this project of my exploration was working with the stereotypes of a Polish immigrant, the hard worker and the hard drinker. And somehow I would find these elements, like the set of pliers, which of course reminded me of the big crisis with the Polish plumber soon after the expansion of the Union, when Europe actually developed an allergic reaction to the influx of the Eastern European workforce. And I was, whenever I could find a site that called for some sort of an exorcism, I felt, of the Polish worker, I would just do it, mostly for self-irony purposes. And they became a little bit like tongue-in-cheek approaches, but I felt it was a good exercise for me to deal with those stereotypes that I carry, but I never really worked to carry. I never really earned these badges, you know. The fruit pickers, the construction workers. I was also looking at elements of invisibility as an immigrant. If I am a white male living in Britain, so unless I open my mouth and reveal this strange accent, people wouldn't notice in the street that I was the other. You know, I can be totally invisible. But there are so many people who were born and bred for generations, but the skin is slightly darker than mine, and they are definitely straight away picked as the other. You know, and the questions of what makes a good immigrant, what does it mean to assimilate, and how slowly these processes work for us in societies. Of course, cross symbolism of home. This image I included because there's a lake in Germany, in Olpe, Biggesee, and at the bottom of this lake there is a village. The dam was built in 1950s, and the whole village disappeared. And I met journalist Claudia Kuchland, whose mom, as a little girl, lived in that village, and they relocated, of course. And when her mom was in the 70s, they brought the family back to that place to see it for the first time, and she could pinpoint exactly where the house was, even though it's not a surface of the water. And Claudia swam in it, and she said that she felt this very profound connection to this house that she couldn't see, but she knew it was there. And it's for me, it was a beautiful description of Heimat, and in Welsh there's a word called hiraeth, which is the kind of longing for home. She cannot really put a finger on. I think I'm taking too much time, so I'm going to skip now through these images till a little bit quicker without telling you all these stories. The work is available on my website, so you can always have a look. Again, quite a lot of exercising, demons, you know, of nationhood, and through the walking, actually through traversing and finding these elements, I found that this is the most rewarding thing. When you walk, you actually have the time to think. The pace of thinking, pace of walking just go exactly at the same time. As Rebecca Solnit wrote, it's 5 kilometers an hour roughly, and they just go. So that's why we kind of meditate. That's what philosophers walk around with their hands behind their backs for hours thinking. That's where your brain synchronizes with your body. And I would find these answers or little symbols to stories that I heard months before. A couple that's in Germany, and a couple in England asked me if I was scared of Brexit, and I said I wasn't because I was British. And they said, "Oh, okay, but will you need a visa to stay in Britain after Brexit?" And I said, no, because I'm British, I can stay here. They said, "Oh, okay, but will you need a work permit to be in Britain after Brexit?" And then I realized that no matter what I did, I was not British enough, you know. And then I found this vice, this kind of thing, trying to squeeze through it was almost the same kind of experience. I would make these kind of connections between images and stories that I heard along the way. And this one is Ulrika Goertner, was a German artist who made this vivarium, beautiful idea of a UFO, where she placed the silk moth, Chinese silk moth, and she placed it in cities for people to look through the little windows and the little saucer. And inside was the moth living its full life cycle. And Chinese silk moth was imported to Britain, to Europe as a worker to make silk for us. And then it, of course, spread widely because it loved it here. And suddenly it became a threat So we have this beautiful parallel of how we imported those creatures, and then we said, oh my God, we have to get rid of them because there's too many of them now. So she locked them in this UFO saucer, and people could look through the window and just watch it, but still safe because they were contained. And I by accident found this saucer in a painter's backyard where she had parked it after the exhibition. So it was a wonderful discovery. And there were these little creatures, as you can see, spacemen walking around. So sometimes when you walk, you get given these gifts that you wouldn't find otherwise. No research could get you to that place, And that's the border of Poland and Czech Republic. And I found it quite interesting because that stone says P for Poland, but underneath there's a D for Deutschland, Germany. The border, which is there now, was a totally different stone, 70 years ago. So I found it quite profound. And that's the entry to Poland and the most far right kind of country there is. So I found it very fitting that the sun was actually leaning towards the right so badly on my entry. And then before I finish, I just wanted to show you a few images of light boxes. I documented this journey on Instagram as I was walking to get people involved, because it was a project about me, but about you, about everybody else. So I was posting images as I went, and people could tell me what they thought about home. And then I presented these images as a very long, 10-meter long light box, where these individual images were presented almost like a replica of a phone, but through printed version, just to give it that kind of recontextualize visual, this thingy. So I think I made it in time. I'm going to stop sharing now. If there are any questions, I don't know if you have time for them now, but stop sharing.
Yeah, so if you have any questions for Michal, please, you can ask them now or you can ask them later. We're going to have some time during the panel discussion with Alexander as well to speak about your questions. I think.
Thank you for indulging me for listening.
Well, thank you for. I thought it was really interesting. I didn't know anything about that lake that you mentioned. We were just looking it up because that's in Germany. I haven't heard it before. I haven't heard about it.
Bang in the middle of my distance between Cardiff and Poland. That was actually very, very much the pivotal point. So I found it quite at the right time. And yeah, it's a lovely lake if you guys want to go for a swim.
Yeah, I think if we don't have questions at the moment, we can move on to the second speaker. But thank you so much, Michal, for letting us walk along with you along that two walks. And and if there are any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box, and also we can ask any of the speakers later during the panel discussion. Yes, so welcome our second speaker, Siddharth Agarwal now. He's the founder of Vedatum India Foundation and is a trained aerospace engineer. However, currently most of his time he spends collecting stories while walking across India. And this is in an attempt to document and bring stories of marginalized people and the environment into the culture at large. And in the past 5 years, he has walked over 6,000 kilometers across India and mostly along rivers. So we're looking forward to hearing more about that today.
Thank you, Marie, and thank you so much, Michael, for the wonderful presentation and sharing your ideas. I was seeing your presentation and I was wondering, should I modify mine? Because there were so many ideas that also echoed when you were talking about the projects that you were doing. About walking, I'm not trained as a photographer. I haven't undergone any training as a photographer, but yet I'm walking and photographing and making films, recording people's stories. For today, I thought, apart from the idea of walking, um, apart from the idea of walking and photographing, what walking also does is to help us develop filters by default. And I wanted to talk about it. Um, Most of my walking have been part of these two projects. One is called Moving Upstream at my organization, Veditam. And the other is when I was part of Out of Eden Walk with Paul Salopek, when he was walking across India. This is where most of my walking has been. And walking in a way has allowed me to embed myself into the landscape along with people. Um, like Michael also mentioned, being at the pace of how people are and not being at the pace of a motor vehicle, not being at the pace of a faster vehicle, which intimidates people, which people don't relate to. There's a power dynamic that comes in by default by being on a vehicle. And just to give you a sense of where all I've walked, you can see that this is a bit of a cropped map of India, but you have the river Ganga, the river Ken, the river Betwa. I haven't walked. Fellows from my organization walked it as part of a fellowship program that we run, where we invite young people in India to walk along rivers. And the yellow line you see is where I walked with Paul Salopek on the Out of Eden walk. And yesterday there was a lot of talking about walking within cities. And today I'm very glad that we have this discussion with Michael starting about walking long distance beyond cities. And that's what I wanted to also start off with. Um, Escaping the road's tyranny, because often all of our engagement with the world now is limited by this invisible tunnel that is a road. Where there is a road, we are. Where there is no road, we are not. The ease of reaching a place where there is a road is almost the only criteria for going anywhere or documenting a story. And this also gets reflected in popular media, and which again ends up through the medium of photographers and these media shaping our understanding of the world. I want to show you a few maps. I hope you don't get bored, but this is a map of the river Ganga in India, and all the red circles that you see are motor bridges across the river. All the red marks that you see are motor bridges. I'll zoom in so that you can see it a bit better, but just wanted to give you a sense of what this is. What I've done is marked some of these popular places on the river. Unfortunately, most of Indian and global understanding of this very popular river is limited to these locations. And all of these locations are accessible by road. And all the spaces between these popular places, even if they do have motor roads or bridges, it just escapes people's imaginations. And all the images that I'm going to show you today is going to be outside of, in between these popular spots. And I think walking by being walking has enabled, the escaping that tyranny of the road, that you have to be close to it. And that is the only way to reach a place. This is the first state where Uttarakhand is a state in India where the Ganga flows from, and rivers are in valleys. That's where they flow, and in the mountains, roads are also very close to the bottom of the valley. It's easy to build roads there. It just makes sense to build them there. So people still have an understanding of what the river looks like all around, all across the state. But what's interesting is that some years ago, there was a dam made on the river, a huge dam that submerged about 130 villages uh, behind that dam. And a new road has been made, which is not along the river, but it's away from the river. So nobody sees the submerged villages, nobody sees this huge lake that's been created. But when you do go through that area, when you walk, you don't have to be restricted to this, fast-paced road where you can just zip through. You can actually take the old road, or you can take village roads, which are right next to the reservoir. And this is what you see when you walk through that area. When we were walking through that area, the reservoir was drawn down a bit. The water had been released a bit, and old barren trees, once part of a vibrant landscape, were emerging out of the reservoir. And if we have to think about how we are placed as a world today, thinking about climate change, thinking about what we're doing to the environment and to ourselves, an image like this or a visual like this is something that would probably make us think. But instead, the road now takes you away from this. So walking, in a way, was the antidote to that fast pace. I mean, it's literally as well, but um, another very interesting, there are some popular in the state, and a lot more pilgrims want to go, and religious people want to go and visit the temples and pilgrimage spots there. To facilitate that, the government has illegally pushed projects without clearances by escaping regulations that the government itself has created, and which is ending up in cutting down of forests that are 200 years old, trees that are 200, 300 years old. This is happening when the pilgrimage season, so we have a pilgrimage season where you actually go, then there's an off season well. So when it's off season, all these roads are being widened, all the trees are being cut, and the forests are being taken away. So even when you do come and then take the road, you will never notice the numbers on the trees which are marked to be cut. And this is around the first strand of trees that were allotted to be cut. And the workers who are actually building the road, none of them are from there. They're from the neighboring country of Nepal. They are from other states in India further east. But all of this becomes invisible when you go fast. When you go fast in a car, but going slow, walking really exposed a lot of these ideas and a lot of these stories when we were walking along the river. The next state that the river flows through is Uttar Pradesh. And apart from these two, I think probably you might have heard of Banaras as well. It's hugely popular. But unfortunately, if you see, the river is like about 1,000 kilometers within the state. But all we see is 3 points on the river. And all of those are because there's a huge density of roads in those areas. And these are places where, even as photographers, when we think it's, except a few cases, it's almost about the ease of how we can go and do a story. So I think that narrative needs to be challenged by showing that we're just showing probably 5% of what the river is, if you're talking about a river in this case. Similar case in the state of Bihar, where it flows through, similar in the case of Jharkhand, and the state of West Bengal. Moving on from maps, walking, whenever we go out to take photographs, make photographs, and connect with people before making that photograph, there's this huge barrier that we have to overcome. Walking, by putting ourselves out there, when I was walking alone, sometimes with other folks, but mostly alone. And even if with others, we didn't have a motor vehicle, we were completely, we were as vulnerable as the people we were meeting. What that did was that didn't make them feel that we were a threat. And this power dynamic has come up a lot of times. And I'll talk about it through an example that in the initial stages of when I started walking, I would get very, very annoyed. People would keep asking me, do you have permissions to walk through this area? And the politics is very different between Europe and America and India. So we don't really have any such requirements here to walk through places. And I was really getting annoyed. People were asking me every day, sometimes twice or thrice a day. And there was a day when somebody asked me this question, and I gave them an answer, which also made me realize that people asking this question was actually a success of the idea of walking, because they weren't seeing me as a threat. So I asked this when this person asked me, "Do you have a permission to walk from here?" Uh, in response, I asked, "When was the last time you asked someone traveling in a car or a motorbike for a permission?" And that person started thinking about it, and they were like, "You're right, and I haven't ever done that." And that was a moment of success, or rather there had been moments of success, but it was the moment of realization for me that this idea is working, that people are not seeing you as a threat. They weren't asking people in a motor vehicle or a car for that same permission, because it's a power dynamic that the motor vehicle brings in with it. um, Coming back to this day, I was walking through South Bengal. It was just before monsoon, but it was very muddy. I had already slipped and fallen, I think, 3 to 4 times that morning, and I'd hurt myself. I was covered in mud. I would have almost slipped into this backwater, and these two kids picked me up, cleaned me off, and this image that I made afterwards is, for me at least, signified much more of a connection, but that was built because of making myself vulnerable. Otherwise, when we think of somebody in front of a lens, it's generally people feeling vulnerable. So walking in a way changed that, and changed who was feeling vulnerable. Um, and that made me so many friends, friends that I would have taken days and weeks to probably get in touch with. These were people who met me at a railway station where I was going to spend the night, and they ended up taking me home, feeding me, seeing me off next morning, and all of this happened in a period of window of 12 hours. And it happened every day. It kept happening every day. In fact, it's become so rare to find people walking, and to find people walking long distances, that this duo, a father and son duo, actually stopped me in the middle of the road, took me to their shelter where they were working, fed me, and were convinced that I was some religious guru. They wouldn't accepted that I was just someone who was walking, and they were like, "You have to give us a sermon. We won't let you go if you don't do that." They even trying to touch my feet. And that is how rare the idea of walking had become, and how easily all these filters between us broke, and they were just speaking their mind to me. And the photograph that I took afterwards, or the way we document the story afterwards, it really changed. And for me, uh, that has been something that I've really tried to build upon as I've walked over the years. Um, it's made me go close to where people are without them feeling shy about what they're doing. And yeah, it just put me in very interesting places, with very interesting perspectives. These are two people trying to the structure behind them is the entrance to a bridge, which they were going to cross on a river. And this image, when I showed you the map of these states where they're just one popular spot, or two popular spots, or three popular spots, where the imagination is limited of what a river is, this is one of those places where there is no bridge. So we don't see this place. But then people still have to cross the river. How do they cross the river? Uh, how do they live their daily lives? And I've been fortunate to go to hundreds of such spots where there are big and small boats that people take to cross the river. And it's just this part of what the river is, I think, has been missing from our larger perspective. And while I'm talking about a river, it just applies to anything else, to. The river just for me was the medium that I was taking to walk along. And yeah, these are places not accessible by road. I want to reiterate that unless we break the tyranny of the road, which is very easy to break by using the medium of walking or just using simpler tools, I think we can be amplifiers for the stories of so many people. This is from a ghat where people were praying to the river, and even in this space where this monastery, it's a Hindu monastery that was on the banks of a Hindu ashram that was on the banks of a river, people were fascinated by the idea of someone walking along the river, even where they could assert that, we are more righteous, we are more connected to the river because we live next to the river, we pray next to the river. Even there, the idea of walking really changed everything for them. Like the earlier speaker also mentioned, walking itself is a medium of meditation. It's that repetition. Even in meditation, you're repeating, and that's how you slowly start to make sense of things. And landscapes opened up. I don't know if these places have ever been photographed in this way. If people have really seen these places, because we end up either when we're doing even wildlife surveys on the river, it's all on boat. So we hardly on the banks of the river and seeing the river. And overnight, I also had the fortune of going fishing with fishing communities a lot of times, and they really accepted me because of the fact that I was walking. It wasn't that I'm going to take their fish and run away or go and complain about them. I was more vulnerable than they were. In fact, in the case where the photograph is on the screen, I had to leave all my belongings back in a village where I didn't know anyone, and trust them and go fishing with them. And we came back only next afternoon. So it was a whole 24 hours out in the river, staying in a river island. So it was a engagement of trust from both sides. Both sides had to make that commitment. Though I would think that they would feel more intimidated if somebody, um, or I, or rather I'd say that they felt more comfortable because of the fact that it was someone walking alone, vulnerable. And from this, I want to move on to another important thing that I want to talk about. But at this point, I want to mention that all my walking, especially given the conditions in this country, is a luxury. People walk every day for survival, for food, and in no way is my experience or equal to theirs. Nowhere close, but it is still an important way in which we can look at the world. And talking about looking at the world and lens is that if you noticed, there was not a single non-male subject in any of the images till now. It is absolutely a man's world out there, is what I realized when I went walking. And apart from being a man's world, which I was photographing, it was also a man's perspective. Because it's very difficult as compared to my position, as my privileges, for a woman in India to undertake a similar journey. And while I have been making attempts from my own side to see if how I can help make that happen, uh, the continuous movement has also helped me shed my uh, blind spots and start seeing more. And then the filters dropped, and once the filters started dropping, there was more that became visible for me. uh, Earlier I was not able to even have conversations with women because I was just not thinking about the fact that I was mostly talking to men and documenting their perspectives. So walking also made me think about this, both from my position of privilege as well as the stories that I was documenting, and the labor that women were undergoing, and which was not documented by virtue of being this male filter that I also had. I think is also, it's evident across the world, not just in India, and something that I think we really should be looking at. Um, just quickly take you through a few photographs. And yeah, I just wanted to like end with that and let you see these photographs. If you have any questions, I think we can take some time to answer questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Siddharth. Yeah, if you have any question for him, please put them in the Q&A box. I, at the moment, can't see any in there, but maybe, yeah, we have a couple of minutes now because we're going to have a short break after this anyway. Maybe some of the speakers might have some of the other speakers might have some questions for you. I don't know. But also we can talk about this at the panel, of course. Well, I had one question about the Vedatum Foundation. So is it you or you having other collaborators that like go on these walks with you, or even go on walks alone? And how do you connect with them? Like how do you find these people as well?
Right. So at the organization, it was me, who was going on the walks earlier. But like I mentioned, the lack of worldviews and perspectives was really striking. It was just me who was talking about things. So what we did was we instituted a fellowship program. And Paul from Out of Eden Walk, I was actually walking with him when all of this was happening. So he said, why don't we join hands and do this? So we started a fellowship program. We invited applications for people to walk along a certain river. We got incredible applications. We were supposed to select 2. We ended up selecting 4 fellows who we then sponsored to go. And it was not a big sponsorship. It was just enough to help them survive on the field and a small stipend for them. But we had incredible applications. So we ended up selecting double the number of fellows, and they went and created a documentation that I could have never imagined. There was, on the first go, there were a couple of folks studying urban planning, and one who was a journalist, one who was a wildlife biologist. And then it moved on to a second round of the fellowship, where we had a couple of artists go make sound pieces out of it, make zines out of the experience. So we've expanded it, and last year we couldn't do any because of the pandemic. We're hoping to restart the fellowship program as soon as.
I think we have yeah, a few questions now. So there's someone just asking both, is this something that they became aware of or before they set out on these journeys?
Do you want to go, Mikhail? I've been talking for a while. Maybe.
Or we can.
We can talk about. I mean, I'm very happy to say that I wasn't really thinking about it. I had preconceptions, and I thought the world was very dangerous before I set on my journey, but I was proven otherwise. And Siddharth's experience was similar, but I feel it has been. You actually, when you meet individual people and you realize that people as individuals are fundamentally good, that's something that I wasn't prepared for from the narrative online. When you get all the news feeds saying that the world is a bad place, you always get the bad news screaming at you on Facebook, news, BBC, whatever it is, always like doom gloom. And then I actually didn't meet a single that I would say were fundamentally evil. So that was when the vulnerability was actually fantastic. Nobody actually is threatened by a pilgrim. And I loved, Siddharth, what you were saying. People are not used, people are curious about you. If you're walking with a big bag, there must be a story. And there was this lady in Germany who stopped her car just to go back to saying, come for a cup of tea, because I always pick up a person who walks, because if they're walking, there must be a story there, because she wants to find out what the story is. It's a mutual curiosity. That's my experience.
Right. Just adding to that the experience has been very similar in terms of people being good. Though I do have to say that the current political condition in India has really made people very aggressive, and I have observed it over the past 5 years that it's way too aggressive now. I mean, even though, and I will not let this overshadow the fact that 99% of the people that I've met have been absolutely just amazing. I mean, I couldn't have even expected more. But there is that increased amount of um, just this anger that people have, and they want to. There's this kind of xenophobia that people have that's just increasing every day that we see in India. So that's been my experience. But again, that's just 1% of the whole experience.
There's another question in the chat to you, Siddharth. It's from Lucas. Are you using the walk as a way to gain access to many of those remote locations and people, or are there more like accidental encounters?
No, thanks, Lucas, for the question. The walk is actually um, by design meant to do this, is by design meant to access these locations which are otherwise left out. That was a hypothesis, and it's also happened for us in real. So that I'm very happy that it has worked out that way. But definitely it was by design. If we want to use the walk. There is a question in the chat. Should I quickly take that?
Sure, yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Des asks, how did the women you meet generally react to you as a pilgrim? It's been an interesting uh, response from women because being such a patriarchal society, women generally do shy away from being the first person you speak to. Um, However, I've seen that in uh, more rural communities, the women are more forthcoming as compared to women in cities. It could have to do with many factors. I'm just wanting to share an experience that I've had that women in rural communities have been more forthcoming and asking about where I'm going, what am I doing there, and even inviting me to sit outside their house and giving me food and water. So that's definitely been a difference between the urban and rural.
I think there's one question in the chat that's for Michal, but I think I would just keep that for the panel discussion. So we're gonna answer that later. For now, I think we're gonna just take a short break, about 15 minutes, and we prepared a sort of walking playlist on YouTube that I think Priya will be sharing with us.
Yeah, I will share my screen. Great.
Also, if you have any suggestions for songs or bits about walking, speakers and participants, yeah, feel free to pop them in the chat and we'd be happy to add them to the playlist. So yeah, see you all in about 15 minutes. Yeah, grab a coffee, feel free, and we're gonna start with the presentation from Andreas Langfeld after the break. So see you guys then. artistic documentary photography. In 2016, he showed his work Status in a solo exhibition at the Museum Ostwald in Dortmund. And his work was also shown in several group shows, such as the F-Stop Photography Festival in Leipzig, and also at the Biennale für aktuelle Fotografie here in, I think, 2017. And yes, also he had a group show at the Centre Pompidou in Paris, and he lives and works in Düsseldorf, and we're looking forward to hearing more about your work today, Andreas. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for having me. Yeah, and thank you for the organization of this, Marie, Yasmin, Anna, Shuchi, Priya, and Mia and Siddharth for your great talk. And of course, yesterday it was awesome. If you missed it, check it on YouTube. So I will share the screen. So it's okay? Great. So when I started going out at night and photographing the changing cityscapes due to the coronavirus, I also started to take notes just to organize my thoughts and to figure out why I do this at all and why I'm fascinated by photographing closed off areas. So these notes will be the base for the talk. So some of the thoughts describe my sense for the situation back then when it all began 1 year ago. Of course, I will also talk a little bit about walking and what walking plays for a role in this work. Anyway, so we experience history, and that feels exciting and bizarre at the same time. Irritation and uncertainty accompany our everyday life. New forms of behavior, a constantly changing cityscape. As you can see here on the picture on the left side, where they mark the ground with circles, where to sit, to keep the security distance to the next group of people. And just in case if you wonder, the picture on the right side shows the backside of a quickly installed first COVID test center in Düsseldorf. And they wrapped the barrier tape in an almost artistic way, which is really fascinating. I mean, this double page could be someone's land art project. So back to the notes. The limitations of our usual lives that would have been unimaginable just a few weeks before March 2020 have long since become new normality. No one can foresee what will really happen now, and that is still the case today. Photography is a good tool to approach things, to observe the unknown, to look at the known differently, and to ask questions. How can you actually depict an invisible threat and its effects? I see this work as an attempt to understand what has been happening in my immediate surroundings since March 2020 due to the worldwide pandemic. For those who don't speak German, the picture on the left side was taken on a playground, and on the little roof it's written democracy or dictatorship. The picture on the right side was taken in the main library of Düsseldorf. Trying to understand is probably one of the main reasons why I went out at night to photograph, because in photographing, one has the illusion of having access to something, of understanding something, and of de-alienating something. the photographic view of space. I began to photograph places that witness the limitations of our familiar surroundings. The photographs are taken at night and I use flash, as you maybe already recognized. The deserted images seem artificial and just as unreal as the time they document. Is this still dystopia or already reality? The motifs underline this mood. Places which stand for normality, joy, and social encounters are robbed of their functions and made inaccessible. Public spaces such as parks, playgrounds, plazas, main station, supermarkets. I'm very attracted by supermarkets, by the way. Places inside also, like cinemas, libraries, universities. Here we got a fantastic supermarket. And on the right side, the main station of Düsseldorf, smoking area. A little skate park, also closed. On the right side, there's a little Christmas market, which was a huge discussion here in Germany too, if they should open or not. And some already existence of Corona, like here on the picture of the right side. And again, the red-white barrier tape. It limits our radius of movement and determines what is allowed. Its function to keep people away from something. At the same time, these signal colors exert a strong attraction, at least on me. Together with masks and disinfectant dispensers, the barrier tape joins the iconography of the new normality. In Düsseldorf, I live nearby the river Rhine, and from there it only takes a 50 minutes walk to the old town, a place which is very famous for its beer and party and bachelor parties, disco and stuff like that. A place I normally avoid, but the place where I actually started the series, because I wanted to know how this party place with thousands of drunk people each weekend looked like on a Saturday night in March 2020. And it was all empty. And this, you see here in the picture, the stairs are very known for people gathering together, having drinks, and I mean, it's crowded in the daytime and the nighttime. It's the place in the old town. And this was one of the first pictures I took. Then there are the pictures of supermarkets, abandoned. At night and in the flashlight, they have a disturbing effect. The improvised protective measures around the checkout areas show something is wrong. Especially at the beginning of the crisis, the supermarket was a place that united everyone when no one wanted to be united. The supermarket seems to me like a metaphor of the crisis. Here, there are the people who have no choice but to work there every day and expose themselves to danger, while those who are being worked for are making the profit of their lives. This is a quote from a conversation I heard in the supermarket between two colleagues who were angrily talking about their boss because of overtime and working conditions and stuff like that. and in between us and the others, the solidary and the unsolidary, with their hoarding panic buys. The supermarket as a social melting pot with all the human emotions, abysses, and banalities. The first place to go when something like a crisis is brewing. Everyone has to go there, and especially at the beginning, no one really wanted to be there and expose themselves to danger. A drugstore chain here in Germany has been advertising for ages with the slogan, "Hier bin ich Mensch, hier kaufe ich ein." Here I am human, here I buy. This quote is mutilated from Goethe's Faust. There it is, hier bin ich Mensch, hier darf ich sein. Here I'm human, here I'm allowed to be a human. The supermarket seems to me like a biotope for behavioral scientists or sociologists. Here I'm human, here I buy. Here I'm human, here I behave selfishly, unfriendly, friendly and attentive, aggressive, lost in thoughts, rushed, tired, snotty, helpful, bored, or I just don't care about others. Even in the pictures that you can see here, that show a ghostly empty supermarket in unnatural light at night, all this is implied and felt by us viewers. The world is changing at least as fast as the virus is spreading. We are constantly confronted with new information, new hashtags, new mutants since a few months, and paradoxically, we as individuals are somehow standing still. But it's not actually our lives that are being zwangsentschleunigt, which means forced to slow down, but rather the global social system. Because the problem is global, the adjustment of the life situations affects everyone everywhere. The global society system and its movements around the world is responsible for the spread of the virus, while at the same time trying to limit it. Since the term border is strongly associated with national borders, the virus could thus be described as borderless. We, on the other hand, are limited by the virus and feel the borders from the global to the radically local. Our radius of movement is reduced to the bare minimum, and where possible, we avoid contact with other people. One part of my concept is to photograph the things which are within walking distance in my radius of movement. That's why most of the pictures are taken in Düsseldorf. And being limited to the local leads to an urge to move more. We search for balance. Recently, I heard a program at the radio about walking. And there I learned that the German word spazieren, to go for a walk, comes from the Italian word spaziare, which in addition to wandering around also means to gain space and to expand somewhere, which fit quite well in the urge to maintain the illusion of freedom in lockdown by walking around. We need to expand, or we have the impression to expand. It is to mention what was also mentioned yesterday and in the beginning, that for many, it's the limitation that gives the impulse to open one's consciousness to the immediate surroundings. Walking opens up new spaces that were not seen before in the hustle of everyday life. Under normal circumstances, walking or strolling can also be something subversive and can be seen as a political counterbalance to the pressure to perform and the capitalist optimization of time, and of course the hectic pace of everyday life. Walking itself has always been a deceleration, and in a capitalistical sense, a waste of time. Walking can therefore be seen as a luxury good. because not everyone can afford to invest time and energy in walking. Of course, these days walking also has a purely pragmatic reason, since according to scientific knowledge, outdoors and on the move, it seems to be the safest way to meet other people. For many, the deceleration brought by the pandemic makes it possible to go for a walk. So maybe this is a new freedom gained in limitation. This is on the left side, the photographic section of the library. What happens next? No idea. Everything is a big social experiment. Will it have a lasting effect on our behavior? Will physical distance, for example, remain the norm even after the crisis? Will there continue to be limitations on events and public spaces? Will the French now stop faire la bise, kissing each other on the cheek to say hello? For many young French people, this is probably a welcome change. Will those who continue to use this greeting formula soon be considered as reactionary? What will replace the strong handshake as the dominant form of greeting? What will there be hugs? But more importantly, when or what is after the crisis anyway? A friend recently told me that when she sees people in films hugging each other, she briefly cringes inside. I found that is very interesting, and it actually describes the times we are in quite well. What are they doing there? Why don't they have masks? From the time before the corona pandemic, we all know the pictures of groups of people sitting in the park without safety distance, or pictures of people celebrating together at concerts. Have these now become historical images from the past? Or are they images that show a distant, almost unimaginable future? Every now and then, I ask myself whether or not the work I show you will have a strong relevance for me later on. The answer to this is fluctuating and coherent with the general feeling of uncertainty. At the beginning of the crisis, when the normal life suddenly came to a standstill, there was something healing about being out at night taking photographs and feel like I was doing something when there was nothing which could have been done. I did it to react in some way, to get out of the state of shock. I have to admit, despite all the negative aspects, I am fascinated by this bizarre time. Especially in the beginning, but also now, I have received a lot of feedback on these pictures. People have written to me on social media and felt the need to talk to me about the time. I got a lot of pictures sent when people saw something in their city that was closed off. Just look, I found something with barrier tape. Come take a picture. The funniest one was probably from a friend from France. She was playing Pokemon Go and sent me a picture of a bank that had been closed off with barrier tape and had a Pokemon that she was about to catch sitting on it. Augmented reality meets dystopia, which is already reality. It's kind of profound when you begin to think about it. I move in the evenings or at night because I like how the darkness and the absence of people changes my perception of the city. Also, I like when there are no people at all. Hashtag social distancing. So most of the time I'm out on my own. Sometimes with someone from my circle of friends or COVID cluster. Sometimes a place I want to photograph catches my eye during the day, and I go there at night in order to photograph it. Like here, I saw these barricaded ramps during the day and went back to the spot at night to take pictures. This sequence might be an example of my photographic approach. I go around the motif and look for pictures that interest me from several perspectives. And sometimes I just choose one, but in this case, I found it more interesting to show the sequence and make my view comprehensible. Of course, I sometimes only take one picture and stop, but most of the time I have to admit that I make too much pictures. Okay, back to the notes. So sometimes I researched the places before. Here it was the case because I needed to ask for permission at the main library of Düsseldorf, for example. And sometimes I just set off without a specific place as a goal. But it's not completely aimless because my movements through the city, in these movements, I refer to the experiences I've made. So I have a guess at which places I can find my motifs. And beside that, of course, I always follow a mission when I go out at night. So it was never just walking around like a flaneur would do. Nevertheless, the path and what I perceive along the way is also important to me. When the city sleeps, there's more to see. And you won't get disturbed that easily at night. There's no traffic, no hectic, and the light at night offers a new approach of looking at the city. I mean, ask Brassai. So even if I didn't find anything to photograph, it was worth it, especially when I was walking with a friend whose opinion and view of the world I value very much. We used the nightly walks to reflect on what is happening. And this is also very interesting and healing and somehow part of the work for me. To reflect on what is visible and what's not, what the crisis does to us. What about the effects on the effects by the measures against the spreading of the virus? These effects are visible. You can depict it. I mean, you see the barrier tape and you look at the closed space behind the barrier tape lines, but you can't see what's on our side of the line. So beyond the visible, there's room for reflection. This is what I meant by I use photography to ask questions. And this is also what happens when I'm walking around with my camera at night. I approach and I reflect, alone or together with a friend. What I show here is a work in progress. I continue to do this until nothing is closed off anymore. By the way, I still search a good title. So if you have something in mind, feel free to write me or in the chat. Coming to an end, I want to pick up the radio piece which I mentioned earlier. They quote Walter Benjamin there from his Passagenwerk. This which also deals with city walks. I quote, "For the strolling person, the following transformation with the street takes place. It guides him through a vanished time. It leads down into a past. When I move through the city at night to photograph, it leads me down into a present that I hope will soon become part of a vanished past, but which I would like to have documented." These two pictures here are the newest. I photographed them yesterday. And yeah, I'm very close to the end. I want to mention one thing. Together with Katja Stucke, who presented her work yesterday, and Oliver Sieber, two brilliant artists from Düsseldorf, we started a project together. It's called 13.3 bis, 13.3 till. And we started a project to share our reflection and artistic approach to the pandemic during the pandemic. We did 2 screenings in public space with our work in progress last year. And for the second screening, we invited other artists from Düsseldorf and worked together with Thalisa Lalai, Alex Grein, Sophie Isabel Urban, and Simon Wink-Borgert. And soon there will be a third exhibition for which we invited great international artists, not only from Düsseldorf. So stay informed on Instagram and follow us there. It looked like this for the first screening. So far from me. Thank you for listening, and yeah, I will stop it.
Yes, thank you, Andreas. I'm just going to check whether there are any questions. So feel free to put some questions in the chat, and we also will have some time later during the panel discussion. Yeah, I think, oh yeah, there is one question. Okay, so what someone is asking, Andreas, could you talk a bit about your relationship with night and the decision to take photographs in portrait mode?
Oh, it wasn't really a decision, I guess. It just felt better for the motives for some of the motives I had. I mean, I took a few landscape format, but I don't know, it was just a feeling. But it began like that, and then I thought, okay, so maybe I will continue like this. And I also used Instagram to publish it right off after the beginning. And yeah, maybe this was also better to do it in portrait mode. But my decision to the my relation to the night is, yeah, in the beginning it just it felt safe to go out at night because I really was seriously to stay at home. And so at night, at least there was nobody out there. So yeah, this is why I started to go at night. And like I mentioned, I really like walking around at night and see all the buildings and lights and the illuminated apartments, and yeah, it's another perception.
Thank you. Yeah, if there are no other questions, I think we will just move on to our last speaker for today. And then if there are more questions, we can answer them during the panel. So our speaker now is Vidya Mohankumar, and she's an architect and urban designer with over 15 years of work experience. She worked in India, Ireland, and the United States. And her work is focused on creating cities that are people-oriented and centered around transit as a part of a sustainable development agenda that she's passionate about. And in 2011, Vidya founded Urban Design Collective, which is a collaborative platform to create livable cities through participatory planning. So yeah, we're looking forward to hearing more about that now. And over to you.
Thanks, Marie, and thank you to the organizers for this opportunity to share our work on a forum of this nature. I'm going to share my screen, and I also apart from the introduction, I feel like I need to clarify that I am this person. But it was also an uncanny coincidence because our first two speakers also had these expansive maps showing the distances that they had covered. And I was rather amused to see that. But what I am going to talk about today is the image of the city. And this is because working with cities for us really points to a preoccupation with this image of the city. Like, for instance, like, the city could look like this to us, or it could look like this, or it could look like this. And all of that depends on it. And very simply, the three images that I have in front of you just, talk about the, the sort of the eye level and the sort of framing of the city image. But I think going further deeper and, as a reflection on our work, it's about defining this desired image of the city. And, that sort of is what drives us. And further to defining what this image of this desired image of is for us, that gets us to that point. So, I mean, all of this is, of course, easier said than done, like, this is the kind of city that I want, and this is how I want to get there. But as we all know, cities are very complex, and with the sort of abundance of players and forces that are constantly shaping it, it's as I said, it's easier said than done to say this is what I want and this is how I'm going to get it. But nevertheless, we get by with a little method to all of this madness. And I think if I were to sort of summarize this method that kind of, is a guiding force for the work that we do, it involves three acts. The first act is, of course, to observe, to see, and to sort of, take it in. And then the second act is to connect the dots, to sort of, put things together, and to sort of interpret it and to decode it and decipher it. And then the third act is to take action. And this could involve several other people where because participatory planning is very important to us, it could be a process of co-design, but nevertheless, I think the critical aspect in this entire cycle, which is perpetual and cyclic, as you can see from this diagram, is the first act, which is the act of observing itself. And a lot of our time is invested in this act of observing the cities and the physical environments that we are working with. But I think what is important is the pace at which we have to do this, and the pace at which we observe is the 1.5 meters per second, and that's the speed at which we walk. So walking in some sense for us becomes that, that way of seeing, and it's so intrinsically tied to this act of observation, which is so critical to all of the work that we do. And I found it like fascinating, just as I was putting together this presentation, to revisit all of our work from this perspective of what walking means to us. Like, and I mean, it's definitely a way of seeing, but it's somehow, as I was putting these slides together, I realized how absolutely intrinsic it is to what we do. And I want to share with you a cross section of the work, some of our work, which revolves around this notion of walking and walking as ways of seeing. So there is walking for discovery, and this is something that we, in our initial years, we did a lot of, because it was important for us to understand the cityscape that we are working with. So walking for discovery meant that we sort of picked on neighborhoods, specific neighborhoods in cities, try to understand them, from a perspective, from several lenses, like, whether it was history or the people that inhabited, or the cultures and the customs, or the legacy businesses that were part of these neighborhoods. So walking for discovery was a very intrinsic part of the work that we did in our initial years. It laid the foundation for us to develop a deeper understanding of the cities that we are working in. And of course, we shared this experience with other people. So a lot of neighborhood walks were conducted with people that were interested in such thematics, and these were done either as curated tours that we shared our research with, or it was just, sometimes it was just a process of discovery. We would just walk around the neighborhood, and just look for specific themes that were present, and interpret them in our own ways as well. This is one series of walks that we did. I think this was in 2013 or so. It was a series of walks that we did across multiple cities at the same time. And all of them were about the idea of being a tourist in your own hometown. So we picked specific neighborhoods and encouraged people to rediscover these neighborhoods as if they were seeing it for the first time. Some of these, and we later moved on to taking these a little more seriously, and it morphed into walking for research, and where we started looking at the development history of cities and sharing our experiences and our research with people who are researchers who are also looking into similar aspects. So these were done again either as curated tours or audio tours, where material was shared, and there was, it entailed a conversation on the development history of the city itself. We did walks for advocacy. These were walks that were done with school children in Pondicherry to raise awareness on the heritage value of their schools, their school buildings, and just their precinct itself. So this was walking for advocacy. We also looked at walking for celebration. Again, this was with the Alliance Française in Pondicherry during one of their annual heritage festivals. We encouraged participants to go on a walk with us through the city and document the city as under the theme of Incredible Pondicherry, and this was followed by a photo exhibition that we curated and put together at the Alliance in Pondicherry. So in a sense, this was about inviting locals to come and celebrate their city. Then, of course, there was walking for documentation, where this particular publication that we came up with called Windows of Georgetown. Georgetown is a neighborhood in Chennai, which is really where the city was founded and grew out of. And we went on this walking tour of this neighborhood and documented all the windows, because the windows were metaphorically a lens to looking out at the city as well. And what we discovered was there were, the evolution of the neighborhood through time, and that was picked up just simply from the architectural detailing of the windows that we saw through as we walked through the streets and captured them. Then there's walking for ownership. These are a series of neighborhood walking tours that we do with school children as a way to encourage them to start thinking about their physical environments, to start understanding what is happening around them as they grow up to be future citizens of our cities. And in a sense, it is about the idea of inculcating a sense of ownership for their neighborhood and their surroundings, and then a series of activities that are framed around their observations and what it means to be a resident of these neighborhoods. And then there's walking for participatory mapping. We've done a series of walks. For instance, about 5 years ago, there's a canal that flows through the city of Chennai called the Buckingham Canal, and we conducted a participatory mapping exercise where we asked people to join us to look at it through our 5 senses. And what they picked up from their 5 senses was put down, and the map that you're seeing on your right side was a collected sort of mapping from the 5 senses that people used to observe this canal environs. We also subsequently did more such participatory mapping exercises around this canal, one where we actually mapped the biodiversity, the flora and the fauna that is just, you know, growing on the banks of the canal, and it remains largely ignored. But when you start looking at it from these specific points of view, you know, they start emerging and you start paying attention to your own backyards, which, you know, largely remain ignored in your sort of daily routines. This was something that we did, like, you know, trying to crowdsource the idea of mapping, and we did this during the lockdown period because we couldn't conduct any of these walks, we couldn't do any of these tours, and so we invited people to tell us what their favorite places were, and, you know, also what trails they would like to see put together for the city. And it was a different attempt where instead of us curating these walks, we asked people to sort of tell us what kind of walks that they would like to, what kind of trails that they would like to see. And the idea was that these would become DIY trails that they could just do on their own. We received a lot of responses. Each of the color dots indicates a different kind of trail that people could then explore on their own as well. Considering that, you know, large groups congregating was not something that was to be done at that time. Moving on, there was a realization, as I said, I was putting together this presentation that, you know, walking for us is both the means to the end as well as the end itself. So this cross-section of our work is about creating these walkable streets, and you know, so these are some of the streetscapes that we have worked on in the city that have been transformed. This was a particular street in the city of Chennai, which had about 8 schools within a 1 kilometer stretch, and the residents came together and wanted the street developed as a place that could be a safe environment for the kids to walk to school, and as well for the residents to, you know, do their morning walks. So these are some transformative pictures that show what we did on this street. A couple of before afters that I'm showing you. We also did another exercise where we used a tactical urbanism approach to encourage walking and make a street in Coimbatore more walkable. So there's all of this splash of color. This is a street right bang in the middle of the city where, you know, a lot of people congregate, and we did this exercise where we added vibrancy to the streetscape and, you know, made it playful as well, and you know, comfortable for people to be in. And I mean, the idea being that streets are places, should be places for joy. And so some of these, and taking this idea further, we also engage in, making sure that other people are able to do more of this as well. So these are some training workshops that we've conducted with the city engineers, where we have also taught them how to make walkable streets, so that the efforts can be multiplied, and it's not just resting on a few people to go ahead and do this. We need more streets to walk on. Lastly, I want to share this project that we're currently working on, which is about, not just about walking, but about improving access. And this is because it's a project that we're working on with the Disability Rights Alliance, who are predominantly a group of people that come together to exercise rights for the physically disabled. It's about making the beach in Chennai, which is a public space, accessible to people who are physically challenged, so that it goes a little beyond walking, and it becomes about improving access to people that are marginalized in some ways in our physical environments and not able to enjoy the public spaces as we do. This is where we are at, and I want to sort of conclude by saying that, as I mentioned, that walking is both the means to the end as well as the end itself. And this is important, and I want to tie it back to the idea of the image of the city that I was talking about when we started, is because walking it allows this sort of us to reach a wider cross section of people within the city. So, for instance, what I'm trying to get at is, eventually I think the realization is that our desired image of the city is rooted in the idea that if a city is truly walkable, it is truly livable, and that's what we want. And if I were to sort of further elaborate on it, like if women and children and the elderly and the underprivileged groups feel safe to walk anywhere in the city at any time, then walkable cities become subtle code for safe and inclusive cities. And likewise, if more people are able to choose walking as a preferred mode of transport, then walking becomes subtle code for healthy cities. Because of the benefits of walking that come with it. And I guess that's where we want to get at, and I think I'll end it with saying that, that is our image of the city. And that is what we want and what we desire and what we believe is a truly truly livable city. We are Urban Design Collective. We are a collaborative platform to create livable cities through participatory planning, and you can connect with us on Instagram at UDC_gram. So that's it from me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Vidya. If there are any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat. I can't see any for now. Maybe if our speakers might have questions for you as well.
I see an interesting question, or I think it's an observation about all the beeping of the traffic behind me.
Yeah. Someone said it's quite amusing that you are talking about walking and access for walking with the beeping of the traffic behind you that we could hear while you were talking. Oh yes, and Yasmin just asked, how did you include the senses into your practice?
So I think you're referring to the 5 senses walk that was shown. Yeah. So the idea was that you use your 5 senses to comprehend a physical environment in front of you, and if one of them is finding, is sort of is generating a repulsive reaction to what you're seeing, then it was simply just that logic that it needs to be attended to. So we were really looking at, like, is there smell, is the smell pleasant, do we want to keep that, or do we want to, is there smell that needs to be addressed? Likewise, visually, is there something that we're seeing that we like? Is that frame something we want to keep and retain, or is there a particular frame that we feel we need to have something else to be looking at? In some sense, because as our work is participatory, we find the need to also break it down in a way that is easily assimilated by a very, very wide cross-section of people. So on these walks, we had like children and adults and longtime residents and and people from just various different parts of the city. So in a sense, it's a sort of it's about leveling the playing ground for everyone to be able to contribute. And so in this case, we felt that bringing it down to the five senses, was just basic, for how you would experience the physical environment.
I was also wondering, oh, Siddharth has a question. Yes, please feel free to unmute yourself.
Okay. I was just wondering that with all these, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. With the interventions that you're talking about and the participatory walks that you did through the city, how challenging or how successful and unsuccessful have you been in working with the city administration to actually make a change, or were some of these initiatives started by them in which you contributed? So I wanted to get a sense.
I think it's a mixed bag. A lot of the, I really can't say that it's this way or that way. Many of our projects are self-initiated, and I think even some of the work that I the first streetscape that I showed you was actually initiated by the Residents Association. The project where we're trying to improve access was initiated by the Disability Rights Alliance. But then I also showed you the project where we were working with city engineers, to train them, which means that, there is a clear interest in, learning how to do this. So we've done this, in Chennai and more recently in Coimbatore as well, like where we worked with city engineers to train them and teach them the basics of designing streets that are friendly for all the users on it. And we're also currently working on a project with the city of Chennai where we're looking to develop streets in an entire neighborhood in Chennai. And this is entirely a city initiated project, which was, there was a call for consultants to come and work on it. So it has been very mixed bag. I can't say, it's just, I think for us, it's about pressing all the buttons, because as I said, that's our desired image. So, if we need to get there, I think, we feel like there's this urgency to press all the buttons, and that's what we've been doing in our work.
Okay, so I think there are some questions for other people as well, but I think I would keep them for the panel discussion for now, so we can answer them later. So yeah, if you have any questions for Vidya, please feel free to put them in the chat. And yeah, again, we will have a short break after this so that you can, just get a coffee, and then we will start with the panel discussion in about 15 minutes, and we will again put some music on with some clips and everything. Yeah, if you have any suggestions, still, please feel free to put them in the chat. I think we're gonna share the playlist on our Instagram channels so that you can, listen to it when you're going on a walk the next time, or whenever. Yeah, thank you so much to all of our speakers. And yeah, we're really looking forward to having you back again for the panel discussion in a couple of minutes. So yes, I would say, Priya, can we put on some music if there are no more questions for now?
Yeah, I'll just share my screen.
Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. So before we start the panel, I quickly want to introduce Alexander Hackman, who's moderating our panel today. He is the founder and publisher of Die Motive, Zeitschrift zur Kultur der Fotografie, as well as the producer of the podcast of the same name. And he also developed a card game called Fotografenraten, which means guess who's the photographer. And in addition to that, he works as a freelance photographer and designer and publishes short interviews with photographers and artists. And he sees himself as a communicator for photography. And we're really happy to have him here today and look forward to the discussion with our panelists. So over to you.
Thanks, Marie. Can you hear me? Nice. Thanks to the whole team from Chennai and Mannheim for inviting me and for this really nice topic in connection to photography. As I thought about that first, it was a silly idea of why are we sitting while we're talking about walking the whole time? And then I had this idea of, okay, I get my smartphone and walking around while moderating this panel. Okay, I didn't do this because of maybe the worst internet connection. So I'm sitting in front of a computer right now. I have a bunch of questions and I don't know how to start because there are some questions from the Q&A. Maybe we can start with them. And after that, I'm going into what my idea of this discussion could be. You're fine with it? Okay, there was this question from Lucas. It's to Michal. I'm wondering how different was an experience of walking with the clear idea of the journey and clear in the work, clear of people and go home polish, which seems to be more self-exploration.
I think it's much more, it's easier to do the self-exploration because you don't have that kind of expectation and you're freer. Well, with the previous work, when I was following the grandfather's footsteps, I think I had a certain expectation of finding something, you know, like I gave myself more pressure to it. Ultimately in the end it worked out exactly, you know, once you let go and you explore either project, you let go of the pressure. But I think to start with, there was more pressure with the first project, while the second one was much more playful and therefore more enjoyable in that sense. And I think it yielded more varied.
Okay, there's a second question, but I think it's a very general question to all of you. I think we can get into that later. So I would start in order of your presentation. Thanks for every presentation. It was wonderful. So I would start with you, Michal. And let me start with a very silly question that came in my mind when I read this graffiti on the wall that motivated you to start your journey. It says go home polish, and it's very interesting that there is no other word instead of go, because go is the most difficult way to go somewhere. What would have you done if there was just a fly home polish?
I think I would have flown.
Yeah. What about your project then?
Well, it would be a totally different project. I mean, I would have to address that, you know, if I came to that question. But nobody would have written. I think go home polish. It actually escapes language. It is not about the verb of walk in and stuff. Yeah. It's just an imperative of don't be here, be somewhere else. Yeah. So the means of transportation doesn't really matter as much as the idea of please remove yourself because you know them and be somewhere else. I think, thankfully, it was what go home polish. I understood as walk-in.
Yeah, of course, I think so. And there was one picture in your presentation presenting go home polish, where you can see this path. You know, and that reminds me of a work by Richard Long, who's from 1967. The work was a line made by walking. Yeah. So in this particular work, he left something behind. Is there something you left behind while walking?
Of course, I think every step every step you take, you make an imprint of this planet. It's almost like, the transmission of energy. So that's definitely, I've embedded myself in there, into the landscape, but by which I also feel like I kind of confirm my belonging in it. Like my understanding of home is like the ground under my foot. It's my home, and your home, and anybody else. It's just by the fact that you're standing in this place on this planet validates your existence as you belong here. And I think with Richard Long's groundbreaking at the time, when he was a student, that kind of work of simply traversing until you leave that mark. It really is a beautiful metaphor of you mark your presence by sheerly walking. I love that. I think there's a Spanish poem called "We Make the Path by Walking" as well, which is a photographer that Paul Gaffney used for his project when he traversed the Santiago track, and he was talking about the meditation of marking your foot on the ground.
Okay. The next question would be something I can ask every one of you, but right now I'm asking you, how can photography make walking visible? Because when in every presentation, there was always this this part of you were all walking, but you don't photograph yourself walking, and you don't do photographs while walking. Photography is always an interruption while you're walking.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think in my sense, it's metaphorical in many ways. Because I was documenting the journey as I went on Instagram, it was almost a way of a collective walk without moving. Like you're saying, we're talking about walking while sitting. It's a beautiful paradox. I mean, the world is a paradox. It is built upon paradoxes. So I think in that sense, the walking was just a metaphor. I did have some people join me for a few fractions of the journey to actually physically walk with me. So that element also occurred, but mostly it was walking with your brain or with your imagination, or like, connecting. But I mean, I think it's a way of traveling anyway, right? What is physical, what is not physical is sometimes fluid.
Yeah. Okay. Your work, Go Home Polish, is, as you told before, it's about home. Where is home? Is there, on your journey, has there been one point where you said, okay, this feels like home, or are you still searching?
No, I think beautifully enough, home was everywhere. And I think when you start looking up and you realize you're part of something much bigger than just your own passport or your feet on this ground, when you realize you're walking along a globe, it is yours. You were born onto this planet and you can breathe on it. So I actually lifted myself from the constraints of the little micro divisions. I was born Polish, now I'm British, I'm white, I am this. If you go up and up and up and up far enough, you realize where we all have this common denominator, which is this ground at our feet. So I found home everywhere, and I'm equally at home in Germany as in Lithuania, and all the places I have been. It's maybe a boisterous thing and a privileged thing to say, because I'm, again, privileged white man walking freely wherever he wants to. So it's easy for me to say, yeah, I'm home, and we're all home, and it's a beautiful planet. I mean, I'm not that naive, but my experience was that actually wherever I went, I owned that land, and I had absolutely no fear of anything. It was just, I deserve to be here, just as you do.
Okay, so it was something that you experienced while walking?
Yes, absolutely. It's. I mean, you recognize this, trees and smells and things. It's visceral, it's physical. You feel the steps that reverberate through your body. It's a vibration. It's part of physics. You're part of elemental kind of makeup of this planet. And I felt physically, I chose to feel it, and it was delightful.
Okay, so for me, sometimes when I walk, I just stare down while walking. So does it work for you, walking, thinking, and watching your environment?
Yeah, you alternate. Sometimes you look down when you don't want to see, when you start seeing through your brain, when you're making connections, depending on the time of day. And if you walk for like 8 hours a day, as I'm sure you have, it's at some point it's just so tedious. It's so boring. I mean, landscape, it's not like you go out there, it's a big adventure. It's boring as hell. Trees. So you don't see anything new for hours on end. Therefore, you go inside and you just make little entertainment for yourself, like a monkey. And otherwise, I go crazy. And then, because it's such a meditation of boredom, when something out of the ordinary appears, you notice it like straight away, because, oh, that's different. And I think that's the beauty of it. Like, if you walk for long enough, you will find these nuggets that you wouldn't maybe otherwise see. But it takes a few weeks of tourist kind of excitement. And when I started everything with a good picture, I was like, oh my God, my feet. You take a picture of your feet. Oh, trees, birds, everything. It's exciting, like the fresher spring goat feeling. But then when the boredom kicks in, then you start taking fewer pictures.
Okay. Okay. And in your work, Free of People, you in the beginning of a presentation, you told us about your grandfather who fled, and you said that he walked only at night. Did you ever thought about only walking at night too? Because it's a very different, how can I say? It's very different when you see the world at daytime than you see at night. It feels completely different.
I'm sure Andreas could tell us something about this as well.
Yeah, of course.
I did think about this, but then at some point I made a very clear decision. My experience of the journey is not recreation of their experience of the journey. There was no point in me putting myself almost like to pretend I'm threatened, to pretend I have to walk at night. I didn't have to do it. So I didn't really see the reason to do that, only because I didn't want to give their journey as much as that importance. It was about the distance and that landscape experience by two different people, 2 generations apart. So I did walk at night a little bit, took a few pictures at night, but then again, it became a different kind of project, a darker project. And I did not want that project to be dark. I wanted for it to be a meditation on something bigger than just that particular journey. So that was a decision I made.
Okay, let me just quote one thing I read about you and what you said, and then there's a question after that. Walking with the pace it imposes on the body has naturally regulated the pace of my thoughts, the pace of my creative process in general. Walking has brought with it a meditation which I needed in order to see things a little bit clearer. Which things did you see more clearly? Are there some you could tell us about?
So, you know what, like, most of all, the understanding of my existence in that particular place, and I stopped making excuses, and I also stop trying to be clever, stop trying to come up with concepts, thinking, oh, I need to make this project about home, so I need to really know it. I just said, no, it's okay to actually walk and think, and maybe you'll get an answer, and maybe you won't. And at some point, I just understood that just the walk in itself was good enough. I didn't need to make any pictures for that project. And somebody actually told me along the way, when I met, they said, you know what, just the fact that you're walking is epic. You don't need to show any picture. And I imagine actually having an exhibition where I'm sitting naked on a stool, in a gallery space, and just, that's it. The guy walked from that place to that place and talked about home, and you don't see any visual representation of it. And to begin with, as a photographer with ambitions, I felt like it's impossible. Like, how can I do this? I should be taking profound images that people are gonna go like, oh my God, this is brilliant. But that was silly of me to expect that, because maybe if no pictures came, that also would have been great. And I think that was the clearness that came with actually the pace of walking and saying, just be, and that's good enough. If something comes out of it, that's your answer. If it doesn't, that's your answer. That kind of Zen feeling.
Okay, because your work, especially the work Go Home Polish, sometimes it feels a bit like you're really a performer in some photographs. You just thought about, okay, I have to perform right now. So it's not always about the journey. It's most of the time it feels like it's about you and how you feel in your environment. Am I correct?
Yes, it was an exploration. It was a very childlike thing. You go out when you're a child. I used to play in the fields in the countryside, and you test yourself. You test what does the landscape want from you? What does it do to you? What's dangerous about it, and what's your position within it? And with this project, Go Home Polish, it was an extension of that. You just I didn't plan these. Perform. I mean, I'm sorry to all performers, professional performers, because what I did was just absolutely spontaneous actions, I would say. And to see what will my body do in that landscape, or what would the landscape want from me? And it was just validating my belonging in it in that sense.
Okay, so I think there's not that much time to have a talk with everyone in special. So I have one question to Siddharth. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can hear me. You told very nice presentation, because there was one point I thought about, because most of the bigger cities are divided by a river. So as I'm living in Hamburg, it's divided by the River Elbe, and some people here in Hamburg say everything south from the Elbe is Italy. So it's, and then you told us that it's all about the tyranny of the road. How about the tyranny of a river? Is there some for you?
That's a very interesting point that you make regarding the tyranny of the river. Absolutely. I think there definitely is the tyranny of the river. But what defines tyranny again will be what we'll have to come to.
Okay.
That we are choosing to settle somewhere. It's a collective decision. Whereas in the case of roads, it's very different. It's not similar, it's not a natural process. It's driven by something.
Mm-hmm.
For the river, if tomorrow a depression forms somewhere, it will move there. The road will not. So the road's not following an idea like that. Or the algorithm is controlled by a very small group of people. But the algorithm that's building a river is not controlled by something. It's a very naturally formed algorithm that's making the river itself.
Okay, and then there are bridges over this tyranny.
Yeah. There are, and sometimes the bridges are physical in the sense of concrete or a cantilever or some hanging bridge. But other times, it's the boatman who is the bridge, who ferries you across the river. And it's incredible that when I was showing you the maps, in the last state that I showed, there were like hardly 10 bridges in a 500-kilometer stretch. But there were 50 points, 50 to 100 points where you could actually take a ferry to cross the river.
Okay.
But you couldn't take your motor vehicle with you. You can only take yourself. So that was the difference.
So I think I understood that correctly, that you care about the parts between the bridges and you walk through these parts. Did I understand that correctly?
I mean, I walk all through. I just hope that through my work, the spotlight moves a bit towards the part between the bridges as well. It is important where the bridges too, but between the bridges, there currently is no spotlight.
So you put a spotlight on the part between the bridges.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so, and what is interesting about every presentation, that every one of you had a very different motivation to walk. Especially when I say Michael has to walk because he has to find something like nature or home. You are walking and you find people, you met people, something Michael tried to avoid sometimes, especially in his second body of work. Vidya takes people for a walk. So he says, okay, let's go outside and enter the city. And Andreas just walks because he's searching for something. So maybe you can open your mic. I don't care. We can discuss this. Is there a common point in all of your work? Maybe you can open your mic, everyone. Maybe someone can. Do you think that there's a common point when it comes to walking in every one of your works?
It's exploring, I guess. Like find a new perspective on things. We are searching for something or want to, I don't know, gain knowledge.
I think it's purpose. I mean, I think the thing that ties all of our work, at least what I've seen today, is purpose. Uh, we've of course defined different purposes for ourselves, but walking seems to be the all-pervasive means to that end.
Okay.
I think it's quite animalistic in all of our, almost like you need to check your turf, see your territory, and of course different extension for Siddharth and maybe for Vidya and Andreas. It's recognizing where you are, actually mapping your own existence in this particular terrain and seeing what's happening to it. Right? It's almost like the regular checkup, like dogs do after the rain, you know, like the rain dogs in Tom Waits song. They have to go out and see, okay, so where's my municipality? What's changed and what's going on and how we alter the spaces. That's, I mean, maybe that's the kind of animalistic. Maybe that's my perception only. I apologize if I project it.
Yeah. I would think that that it's something Vidya also said in her presentation, is that by walking we put ourselves in the shoe of the lowest common denominator, so to say. That is where from where you have to actually look up in a hierarchical society too. So unless we go there, we don't see the society from that lens, as opposed to where we otherwise are placed somewhere else in that hierarchy. So I think walking by default puts us in the shoe of the common citizen or a common person who maybe doesn't have access to a car or doesn't have access to the resources to not walk.
Okay. And there's a very interesting question for all of you from Jess Hastings. Does the phenomenological aspect of walking affect your photography and or inform it? Maybe we can check out what the phenomenological aspect of walking is. Okay.
We're in some sense, if I may speak for everyone, I think we're all trying to capture the phenomenological aspect of walking. So, you know.
So it's a circle.
Yes.
Okay. And there's a question from Sumik. When we walking should, okay, well, I have to understand that. Okay, when we walking, should I click stranger people photographs for my project?
I mean, it depends if you want to have strangers in your project. For me, it was I did try, and I thought I should document people I meet along the way to get the stories. But then I soon enough gave up the idea. Because I'm not really good at taking good portraits of people, and also I thought this formula of presenting a person and the story is it's well tested and well used, but I just wanted to try a different approach and actually didn't replicate the usual kind of documentation when you see a project, visual and a story. So you have to ask yourself a question, what your story is, and if you need to photograph strangers or not. And then ask yourself, no, what are the dangers or risks of asking strangers, depending where you are. That's how I would go about it.
So there's one.
I think
yeah.
the question is alluding to the ethics of photography and whether it is acceptable to just capture a subject without permission. I mean, the correct answer to that would actually be that you have to ask. Especially when you're aware of something being, so in which case all the more reason that you should not indulge in something like that without permission. I think I'm going to leave it at that.
Okay.
I mean, it's stressful to take pictures of strangers who are not knowing that they're being photographed, and I think it's not a cool approach because it's hurting their privacy. So I don't feel good if I would do it like this way in other works, not in this work, of course, because there I don't want any people at all, but in general. So I would never take pictures without asking before. But just my point of view.
Okay. Coming back to Vidya later, because she said something very interesting in her presentation, but Andreas, in your work, as we talk about walking, it feels like when I see your pictures that it's more about strolling around. But in your presentation, you told us that sometimes at daytime, you pass by and you see some of this border tape, and you come back at night. So is there strolling at night, or is it just going where you want to go?
It's a mix, because I mean, it's good to see something during daytime and to have a starting point. Then it's for sure that you will at least find one thing to photograph this evening or night, and then you go there, start there, and then check around the area. And of course, I always, I sometimes also choose areas which I never been before. So this was okay. Let's see what's going on here, what's happening here. So there's also for me in walking and thinking, it's not only about this whole Corona thing, but it was also about city and how are the different parts of the city designed, or I don't know, the poorer parts versus the richer parts and everything. So it was also trying to figure out something about city, or at least about the city I live in.
Okay. Because do you sometimes or are you having a destination when walking around without knowing where to go?
No, I have a starting point. And I have a starting point, like, or I have I want to see this part of the city, so I go there and start. Or like I said, I saw during daytime at the, I don't know, Fürstenplatz, there is something which is closed off with barrier tape, so I go there and start, and from there I just continue walking. Or maybe I found 2 stops and I walked the distance in between. For I don't know, sometimes just 2 hours, sometimes until 4 in the morning. It also happened that I woke up because I couldn't sleep that night, 4 in the morning, and I just started there because I was bored. So I just could go out and take some pictures.
Okay. And do you know what's going to happen with these pictures?
Not yet. I'm still searching for a form, how to deal with it. Maybe a book, or I don't know, or maybe nothing.
So, oh no, there has to be something. But it's very interesting because there's not really an obvious narrative when you see these bunch of pictures. So how do you deal with? Am I telling always the same, or is there always something underneath?
Yeah, that's of course, I have this feeling. I mean, in the beginning, it was also guided by this fascination by what's actually happening here, and now you get a bit used to it. You already saw it a few times, the barrier thing, and then of course there's this point where I ask myself, okay, this is what's new now. So maybe I'm less motivated these days than last year, but it's still interesting to me. And like I said, it's also the walking, which is a good thing. I did not walk before like that, and I think I will keep doing this because it's I like the city at night.
Okay, so the next one would be something all of you can answer maybe, or have an idea about what I want to talk. Is that when Vidya told us about that walking is you walk by 1.5 meters per second. There is this okay, maybe I have to tell you something. In my master's degree, I worked about, my work was about movement and time in photography. So how to display movement in photography. So how to display time, especially. I worked with a dancer, and then I came up with notations that you can write down to something like notes for music. You have notations for movements. And while I'm doing research on this topic, I found out that in neurophysics, there is this 3-second step that describes your presence. Presence is the present is described by 3 seconds. Everything longer than 3 seconds is past. So what Vidya told us is that when you walk 5.5 meters, you're in present. And if you go longer than 4.5 meters, you're in past. Maybe Vidya can have a glimpse about that.
Sure, why not? I think I'm gonna reference how cities are temporal, when I said walking is a way of seeing, I really meant it, because you have to sort of move, and even if I had to say this metaphorically, we have to keep moving forward, so as you move forward, you assimilate, you absorb, you assimilate, and the temporal aspect of cities and the physical environments that we inhabit, is a very, very important part of the observations that we make. So yeah, I mean, we do look at the past, present, and the future in our work, and that the microcosm of that is actually embedded in the walking itself, when just the way you said it.
Okay, so maybe it's like that. Yeah. No, it's okay. What?
I said,
I wanted to add.
I totally agree with what you're saying, in that the act of walking has a certain time aspect to it, and that is very critical to the work that we do as well.
Okay, because when I think about what I think about right now is sometimes walking it feels like you're always present. It never feels like past. So when you think about time and walking, it's very interesting that there is this difference between the neurophysics telling you about, okay, everything longer than 3 seconds is just past in your mind, and walking is just presence, I think.
But you can look back.
You can
you can look back, yeah, of course.
You can walk down memory lane.
But when you look back, it's always presence.
It makes me think about that Laurie Anderson text, Walking and Falling, when she says that we walking and you're falling at the same time, because with each step you fall forward slightly and then catch yourself from falling, and that's how you can be walking and falling at the same time. So it's almost like that kind of pendulum.
Yeah.
It goes back to the question Jez asked before about how walking changed the photographic process. I'm not sure how it was for you, but for me, definitely, like I said, slow down. And maybe actually, yeah, I take fewer photographs, and then they're usually calmer. There is no panic, and there's no erratic kind of feeling about this. So no, like meditative. I imagine that for all of you walkers, might have been the same experience.
Yeah, like I said before, sometimes the photograph is an absolute interruption. So when you walk and you feel good, just walk, don't take photographs.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes seeing is also like, seeing with attentive seeing is almost like taking pictures, like you store it in your head. So
yeah, there's a very great book, I think, Photographs Not Taken. It's called Photographs Not Taken. It's photographers write down what they have never photographed. It's a very interesting book.
Yeah.
Because it expands the idea of photography. So maybe we can have some questions. I think
there's just to Mia, actually. What happened when you arrived?
Where do you see this question?
No, it's my question to you.
So, okay.
Because you walked there and then you arrived. And what happened with you? What happened with you and your mind? And after all these weeks and months of walking, you reach your goal, your aim, your destination.
And I couldn't wait to go back. Yeah, I couldn't wait to go back. It was a sad realization that I had a suspicion that it was almost like a spiteful thing I was doing. I was going home, but I knew I wasn't going home because I knew my home is in Wales. So it confirmed to me that I don't belong to Poland, and I don't have that love for the place, not as much as I have for Wales. So it was kind of disappointing, also a sad moment. I was tired and I didn't want to. My mom was waiting with my family with banners, welcome home. It was just a bit of a, embarrassing situation. And my uncle asked me the question, how was it? And that killed me, how do you answer that question? I just wanted to pack my bag and say, see you guys, I've done what I needed to do. I've ticked it off and I can go back home to Wales. It was quite,
Interesting. You did that 2 times. You went 2 times to a place where you want to be, where you don't want to be.
Oh, look, yeah. It's a long process. I mean, maybe when I'm like 80, if I'm lucky enough to live that long, I will have a different perspective. But at that time when I've arrived, also I did not want the walking to stop, even though it was very strenuous. And I'm sure that for all of you walkers, there is a pleasure, physical pleasure in doing that kind of in the process of walking. I love it. And even 3 months in, I was exhausted and I hated the sun. I was angry, not wanted to end. It's almost like you have something that is that has been your life for 3 months.
Okay. Was it the same for you, Siddharth?
Stopping?
No, what Michael said, he hated it sometimes, walking.
No, I would say that initially it might have felt strenuous or physically hard. I walk, my body is in a position where exhaustion at the end of the day. It becomes so routine that I'm so energetic by the end of the day. I'm quite surprised how that happens. That I've been walking for 12 hours with breaks and with stopping and meeting people and taking photographs and making films. But by the end of the day, I'm quite energetic. It's what Michael was saying. But even after 3 months, I'll explain it through this example that the first time I did a very long distance walk and I stopped and I stepped into a car. My mind went crazy. I was used to going from one place to another between when the sun rose and when the sun set. That's the only time loop that my brain understood. And here I was reaching somewhere so far and the sun's not even moved 15 degrees in the sky. And my mind, I just lost it. I had to take time to slowly adjust to it. So that's how it worked for me. Just to the question we were discussing earlier regarding, speed and time and distance. Unfortunately, I don't know, this becomes a performance, whether you want it or not. The walking becomes a performance, especially for whoever is not immediately around you, to whoever you want to tell the story of yourself or someone else. I was on Reddit, I was doing an AMA for the Indian community, and so people were making calculations, right? They were like, okay, we walk at 1.5 meters per second. So in an hour, you can walk this much. So you're saying you're walking 15 to 20 kilometers in a day. That means you've done that in 4 hours. What do you do the rest of the day? And this whole idea of just multiplication of time and speed, and people actually asking you, yeah, you can walk 20 kilometers in 4 hours because we walk at around 5 kilometers an hour. And initially, even I was thinking to myself, okay, this is a pretty legit question. But when you are walking long distance, especially if you're walking like thousands of kilometers, you're not walking at 5 kilometers an hour. Maybe at some point you are. Maybe you are walking for 10 minutes like that. But when I am personally at least walking, I walk and I stop and I look at the tree and I look at the birds around there and I look at the insects there. And I'm very fond of trees and the water. So I stay there, I sit below trees and I spend time looking at the water and I think about things. So for me, it's also a luxury that I get to think about my own thoughts in an unrestricted time, unlike the city when I'm walking. So I personally take a longer time, but it was very funny the first time I saw people saying, this speed into this many hours is this kilometers. What do you do the rest of the day?
Okay, what did you do the rest of the day?
I was thinking.
Okay.
I think I had similar experience for people like on the internet saying, oh, that's not a big deal to walk 30 kilometers a day, because I mean, of course you can do it, but if you do it for like 100 days, that's different.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make a correction. I didn't hate the walking. I hated stopping walking.
Yeah.
So my experience of walking, similar to yours, Siddharth, I loved it. It was a pleasant, wonderful experience. That's why I hated when it stopped in many ways, even though it was challenging, but I didn't want it to stop.
Yeah, okay. So very interesting, because like I said in the beginning, every one of you, walking is just the way to get to one point. Even if it's just one step, you just go one step further. And like Siddharth said, he walked and he stopped and then he watched and then he recognized and then he started walking again and then he stopped. And sometimes he made some pictures and sometimes he met people and talked. And so this walking is a process maybe that interrupts sometimes things you want to do. So you want to meet people, so you have to walk. So meeting people can be interrupted by walking. Did you have a walk, Siddharth, when you met people? Were there people walking with you? Just joining you and say, okay, let's go, well, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, a kilometer?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people have met me, walked for a day, some walked for 2 days. They're like, I'll go to the edge of the next village with you and, I'll take you there. Or they would say, oh, you will get lost because there's no markers really here. So let me take you to the next village. So lots of people did that. When I was walking with Paul, so in India, a white man is an exotic species. So when he was here, people wanted to take selfies with him. And I was walking with him. What he'd do was, you want to take a photograph with me, you walk with me for 10 minutes and then I'll let you take that photograph. No problem. So you walk with me for 100 meters, forget 10 minutes. You just walk with me for 100 meters. And where
How many, can we, walking, way more easy to speak and walking. So it's very hard just to watch, to think.
Maybe you could do it for your next episode of your podcast.
I don't have to talk. Can't talk. Maybe.
Okay.
Good idea. So are there further questions? I don't know. There are. Okay, someone just wrote down, love walking. Yeah, me too. Of course. Did you ever felt like leaving someone behind when you walk? This is a question I always thought about, because you all start at some point, and is there a feeling of leaving someone or something?
Can you repeat that? Sorry,
Did you ever had the feeling that you leave something behind when you start walking?
I can say I didn't have that feeling because I was focusing on being present where I was, and I actually found pleasure in saying, this is here, I'm here now, and that's all that I have. I don't have my past, I don't have my future. So it actually became a lovely exercise in letting go of things. So for me, the walking was the result of walking actually was quite profound in terms of my whole livelihood and how I don't hold on to things. And I didn't feel I left anything behind because everything I have is this, and it was with me all the time, you know.
Okay.
But that was my experience. I don't know about the others.
May I ask one question about the border tape? Do you also experience that border tape so dominantly in India while COVID?
Sorry?
Because I think for us, it's really the thing of the time, and we can see it, or we at least saw it 1 year ago everywhere. And I think it's really interesting that all people just think, okay, I can't go there, and they really don't do it. I mean, we are in such a civilization where they really think, okay, I can't do it, I don't do it. So I was wondering how you experience that, or if there's something, yes, you can tell us about these signs maybe you experienced in the last year. Vidya, maybe?
Yeah, I don't think that it was that for us, but we did see a lot of struggles on the ground.
Vidya, couldn't hear you.
I said that the tape wasn't something that was prevalent. But what we did see was, can you still not able to hear me?
No, I think it's a bad internet connection.
Oh, that's interesting. How about now?
Good.
Yeah. Okay. So I was saying that the tape wasn't, you know, such a prevalent aspect of our, you know, law during the COVID lockdown. What we did see was actually circles on the ground. You know, to indicate social distancing. I mean, we're obviously a very populous country, so there was a need to do the physical distancing on the ground as markers. A lot of, I mean, I think it's also to do with the nature of the lockdown and how stringent it was and so on. So in some sense, like, I mean, we saw a lot of these pictures being shared on social media with the tapes and with, you know, the sort of crossing out of seats in between, you know, just to indicate people don't sit next to each other in public spaces. I don't think it was that much a part of our visual memory during that time. Yeah, I guess it was just, you know, the way it was for us.
Okay, there is someone writing down in the chat that they don't have that many border tape in Lisbon, and I think maybe this is something very special about Germany with all these rules, and yeah, we have to use border tape because Germans are stupid. They go where they don't have to go, so we have to put border tape everywhere.
Actually, I did a little experiment in the time where all these tapes were already gone in last autumn. So I bought some tape and go in the park, and I closed off one of the benches there, and one was free and one was closed up. And I go there every day and see what's happening with the tape. And yeah, no one touched it.
Yeah, one rule everyone's accepting. It's like right now, when you walk by playgrounds in Germany, I think in Hamburg, it's like on playgrounds, everyone, the parents have to wear masks. And you walk by a playground and there's just one person on this playground. He's alone with his or her kid. He wears a mask. It's okay. Welcome to Germany. Oh, I have to wear a mask. What? Why? Why'd you do that? But there's another question to Andreas, of course. How would you, as you are, I would call you as an artist working with photography, if it's correct, or would you describe yourself as a photographer?
Choose whatever you want.
Okay, nice. And how are you connected to this classical idea of street photography?
I don't know.
Sorry.
I mean, in my understanding of street photography, the style is very different to how I take pictures. And street photography is for me, or in my understanding, also something which always has to deal with taking pictures of people in situations on the street, like snapping situations. And I don't do this, so I mean, so feel not very close to this term or this genre of photography. But I don't know. I mean, was Lee Friedlander a street photographer? I don't know.
Maybe I don't care.
Yeah.
He was a great photographer, so
Yeah.
you don't have to think about who he is. But I read somewhere in a comment, I don't know if it was on Instagram, that someone wrote down, "You're a great street photographer," or something like that. I don't know where it was. And I thought about, I never thought about that. This is street photography in general.
Maybe it's just I don't know. I mean, Paul Graham also, for me, it's not the category of street photography. I can't explain why, but it's slightly different, or I wouldn't consider Mihal's photos as landscape photography. These are categories, I can't grab them. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know how to explain.
Michal?
Well, they're very tight categories, right? So I
Yeah.
think it is that is interdisciplinary in many ways. I think it's really difficult to. There is a need to put them in one category, maybe.
Yeah, obviously,
agree with
most
that.
of the time. So there's Jess Hastings just wrote something that to Siddharth. I would like to talk to you more about this. I think she wants to talk about the phenomenological part. I hope that's correct. It is very interesting, as Paolo Cognetti wrote in this book, 8 Mountains, the future is upstream, downstream is the past. It has already gone by. Maybe she talks about, she wants to talk about this idea of past and present.
I just responded to him, sorry, I can't recognize, apologies, with my email address, so we can continue the conversation. I just wanted to say one thing about street photography and consent that we're talking about. We didn't mention right now, but there's a lot of ideas or talk about consent that comes around with street photography. But there are cameras everywhere right now. It's, I mean, it's in our bedrooms also, but the government can't openly control that as yet. But it's literally everywhere. And then when we talk about consent, I think sometimes it ends up just being about the consent a photographer takes, which is a consent that we talk about, whereas this institutional consent is something that's just like, at least in India, most people are just blissfully unaware and are okay with being on camera 24/7. I don't know about other countries, so I can't say, but here most people are maybe not informed about the consequences or what can happen. So I just wanted to add that.
Okay. And yeah, maybe, okay. Mushtaq Ahmed, I think. Have any of you tried changing the pace of your thoughts by deliberately walking more briskly or by slowing down? An interesting idea.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
I think for me, it's, I don't know, I was my walking distance and how long I walk is much more shorter than for Siddharth and Michal. But I mean, I can, when I go running, I don't have faster thoughts. So I would say no, because I mean, it's definitely a faster pace, but I'm, for me, and I'm calm in this moment.
It's like
Okay,
relativity, you know, like Einstein's theory of relativity, you know. But I had a situation when I was actually got myself into trouble. I walked to a shooting range, and for some reason I was in the line of fire, and then I had to run away because the bullets started flying around, and I
what?
ran. I was something really silly, but yeah, I ended up in this situation. And I remember that I covered a very long distance crawling, but it lasted like about an hour, which probably was like 10 seconds. But in my
Yeah,
mind,
okay.
everything was very clear, and I was watching the whole, you know, situation. So I think that was the only experience when I had time space bent a little bit for me because of
Okay,
the
so it works. Maybe you can try that out on the street.
Okay, yeah, I mean,
Just crawl over the street and try to slow down everything. It's a very, very, very good idea. So maybe there's not that much time anymore. I have just to say one thing to Vidya. What I really, really liked in your presentation was this the point where you turned out a part of the street into a playground. You show that, and my first thought was, okay, this should be everywhere in the city. The whole city should be a playground. Then everyone would be nice and sweet, and kids could play outside, and there's not that much traffic because everyone just walks around and has fun while walking or thinking and playing. And this is a very, very nice way to change the environment in your city. So that's something I wanted to say.
Let me remind you that the playgrounds were the places which were closed off first.
Yeah.
So,
but they are cut off. They are cut off from the street. But
if the
Vidya
whole
does
city
was,
playground.
but what Vidya does was just everyone who came around just had to walk through this playground and to things on the floor. And for me, I would interact immediately. When I see something that you can play with, I would just immediately interact with it. So I hope the rest of the population on this planet does this too.
Yeah, I like about Vidya's idea that the being tourist in your own city. I think it's a wonderful way of actually regrounding yourself or reconnecting with a place. It's a great exercise to rediscover places because you otherwise you're not really present in there. It was wonderful.
I want to add, I think it also comes from the thinking that, or rather the need to break away from the thinking that our city streets are just places to go from A to B. And, you know, for so long, you know, that has got ingrained in us that, you know, a street is just meant to get from one place to another. But it's about the idea of thinking about streets as places where you can linger, you know. I mean, it's your first interaction with what is truly a public space as soon as you get out of your house, you know. And if that space is not conducive for you to be present, and if you need to just rush out of that, then there's just no point, you know. You don't really have to go to a place, you know, to play, or you don't have to go to a place for recreation or leisure, you know. It's like the public space everywhere, you know. It needs to be that way, and I think it really just comes from the idea of wanting to reimagine and push the boundaries on what streets can be for us. And I mean, for everyone. And I mean, the idea of play is not just for children. I mean, adults can play too, you know.
Of course. Of course.
Just to add, in my city in Calcutta, continuing from colonial times, which has been like 3/4 of a century now, there are still streets where you have boards which say jaywalking is an offense. It's people miss it. People are actually loitering, but technically it is an offense. So that kind of a mindset change is required, I think. What Vidya was saying.
Okay, is there any more time for further ideas? Okay, no. So
yeah,
just
I think
yeah.
we're coming to an end now. Yes.
Yeah. I just wanted to add that I try to talk about photography, but it is more about walking, what we talked about. So for those listening, thinking, "Hey, I wanted to hear something about photography," maybe we repeat this sometimes. So thanks a lot. I think that was a very nice and great talk.
Thank you, Alexander. Thank you, organizers.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thank you to all of you who joined us today on the screen, and also to our amazing speakers. And we also want to thank, of course, our partners in Chennai. It was really great to connect with all of you today, and our partners and sponsors who make all of this possible. So yeah, and feel free to connect with us on Instagram and by our websites, and with the speakers. You will find them. I think we put some information in the chat. And yeah, well, have a good day, evening, afternoon, wherever you are.
Thanks a lot. That was a pleasure.
Are we still wanting to stay on? Looks like there's an after party.
We just wanted to say goodbye to you guys.